Hello, Tom. You've asked me a question that I have never been asked in the 50 plus years of playing with these cars, and one that I had to research and go to the shop manual to figure out. We are dealing with the steering gearbox, and you have had a number of issues with your steering gearbox on your 190 SL, one of which was the play and slop in the steering wheel, and the other is the most recent issue that you're talking about is the up and down axial play of this shaft, the shaft that's at the bottom of the gearbox that attaches to the pitman arm that turns the wheels, and you were getting 20 thousandths up and down movement as the wheel was turned. Not many people realize that 20 thousandths is the thickness of typical human hair is 2 thousandths of an inch thick. So you got 20 thousandths play. That means your steering gearbox shaft went up and down the thickness of 10 human hairs. That's not a great deal of movement. So let's go over what's going on inside the steering gearbox before I give you the answer. This is the worm. It's a recirculating worm, and what this does is when you're turning, here's your steering column right here. So you're turning your steering wheel back and forth. You're moving this recirculating worm back and forth on the ball bearings that are in here. And this is tapered bearings here and here hold it in place. This one fell down, so we'll get it back in place real quick. And imagine another tapered bearing here, and so you're moving this back and forth. All right, going back and forth. Slop occurs in here, and we rebuild these things and to remove the slop. Now then, what this ball right here is acting on is this shaft right here, which is where the pitman arm attaches and where the wear takes place. You got bronze bushings in here, and the clearance between this shaft and the bronze bushings is like 2 10,000ths of an inch, or 2 to 3 tenths. It's a really small amount of wear because clearance, because as you can imagine, when you get a lot of torque on this rod from the wheels and the steering, you cannot excuse me, have any play, any lateral play in here, otherwise it's going to translate to slop in your steering wheel. So let's assume we got our 2 to 3 10,000ths clearance on this shaft right here. This shaft goes down and hits the top of this ball right here, and so now we are turning our shaft and our wheels back and forth. Now what keeps this in place is this is a top cover with this part frozen and stuck, and this is what it looks like when it's in pieces. You got the top cover, and this is how it assembles. You've got this cup with a spring in it. This cup rides right on here, metal to metal. The spring cup, the cup is supposed to be full of grease because it's the only time this spring gets lubricated, full of grease. And then this cap goes on top of it. And how this all assembles is you've got your top cover in place. You put this is all full of grease so it doesn't go anywhere. You take and you screw this down, and then you got your jam nut that holds it in place. All right, so now then, let's read the instructions as to how this is all supposed to go together. We're at this point in the shop manual. All right. Use a screwdriver to screw the set screw in until the compression spring is bunched solid. This is our compression spring, and what they're asking you to do is screw this all the way down until that spring bottoms out. At that point, then back out the screw approximately 3 to 4 millimeters measured at the circumference, and lock the set screw with the hexagonal nut. That's your hexagonal nut. Notice it's got a washer-like surface on one side that snugs down. All right. We're going to lock this down with a hex nut. When doing this, use a screwdriver to hold the set screw steady as you lock this down. Check the steering worm for ease of movement. Now here's the critical part. Let's read this together. The steering shaft must on no account jam at the center position when it is turned. That's this guy right here. This is not supposed to hang up at any point when it's turned, since the steering shaft arm is inclined so that the steering nut is inclined slightly outward. When in the center position, the steering shaft does not reach its highest point when in the center position, but at approximately the 15-degree position in both right and left locks. Thus, when the steering worm is turned completely, the steering shaft reaches its highest point twice. That means this steering shaft right here is moving up and down as you had measured. When it is turned, there are thus two spots at which slight pressure is felt. If, however, the steering worm jams when turned, the set screw must be slacked off slightly. So that's what happens when you don't follow the instructions and cram the set screw down too far. Because what really chaps me is people telling me that they adjusted the steering gearbox to remove the play out of the steering gearbox. Well, people, there is no such thing as removing the play out of the steering gearbox using this screw. All you're doing is applying more pressure on this spring, which applies more pressure on the shaft, which applies more pressure to your steering worm, which makes it bind up. And so what you think is increased, or what you think is decreasing the clearance inside the steering, is in fact just putting extra pressure on the worm and binding it up so it feels tighter. But the real important clearance that you need to worry about is the clearance between the shaft and the bronze bushings, which, like I said, is at 2/10,000ths of an inch, and you can look that up to see how small the measurement that is. And it takes a very specialized machine to achieve those clearances, which we happen to have. And that is the answer to your question. Yes, when this steering moves, this shaft will in fact move up and down. It has to, by its very nature and by the way it's designed. If it does not move, then that means somebody has been in here, crammed this spring all the way down to where it's bottomed out and has nowhere to go, and it's just bunched up inside here, jammed up, and all you're feeling is what feels like an extra tight steering is in fact a steering that is binding. So that's what I think has happened with your previous steering gearbox. Somebody went in here, over tightened this so you had no vertical movement. The box that I did for you now has the correct amount of vertical movement, which is specified in the shop manual, and that is on page 46-4-6. 46 is group 46 for steering, and the rest of the information is right there in the shop manual. So I hope this clears up the misconception that somebody can go in with a screwdriver, screw this thing down tighter, and quote unquote adjust the steering.